No Abrams from the United States and mobilization of Ukrainians in Great Britain. God save the Queen. These are new fakes made by the Russian propaganda this week. We're here to ruin them together with our partners, Real Fake Busters. But before that, Real Fake Review.
U.S. unlikely to hand over Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Russian media claimed that several experts said that Ukraine may face difficulties using the Abrams tanks. While spreading this fake, Kremlin propagandists cited an alleged article by Financial Times.
The American way of warfare involves the use of technologies that increase costs and make it difficult to maintain equipment. Therefore, it will be difficult for the armed forces of Ukraine to service American Abrams tanks, the British newspaper Financial Times reported.
However, neither the author of the article nor the experts featured in the story ever said that the United States could refuse to transfer Abrams tanks to Ukraine because of the technically complex process of maintaining their combat readiness, StopFake project confirms.
Neither the article's author, Steve Charles, nor any of the experts interviewed in the story ever stated the U.S. is unlikely to send Ukraine Abrams tanks because they're complicated to maintain. On the contrary, the article confirms that after long discussions and requests from Germany and Ukraine, the U.S. has decided to send 31 Abrams M1 tanks to Ukraine. That is the equivalent of one Ukraine tank battalion.
Russian media exclusively cites the specialists quoted in the Financial Times, who raised the fear that Ukraine could not be able to handle the Abrams tanks' maintenance. Yet several analysts, whose opinions were disregarded by the Russian media, asserted that many U.S. weapon systems perform as promised. Ukrainian men are being mobilized in Great Britain. This fake has been distributed in Ukrainian social media and Russian media. Users cite a letter purporting to be from the UK government, stating that participants of the Homes for Ukraine program must submit information regarding the residence of Ukrainian male refugees aged 18 and over.
The British man received the letter demanding to hand over the Ukrainian living with him.
The Center for Countering Disinformation clarified the information by sending a request to the London-based human rights organization Center for Information Resilience. Officials and departments of Great Britain did not send such a letter. The fakeness of an alleged document is also evidenced by lexical and grammatical mistakes and a domain that has never been used for official correspondence. Russian media published several fakes based on the address of the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Victoria Nuland. Victoria Nuland's statement on Crimea confirms Russia's position on direct involvement of the United States in conflict.
The statements of a high-ranking representative of a State Department on February 16th about the support of the Ukrainian armed forces in attacking Crimea are a clear confirmation of Russia's position on a direct involvement of the United States in the conflict.
The United States did not declare war on Russia and is not a participant in hostilities in Ukraine. Claims to the contrary are Russian disinformation based on an out-of-context quote from U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland regarding a possible offensive by the armed forces of Ukraine in Crimea.
No matter what the Ukrainians decide about Crimea, in terms of where they choose to fight, etc. Ukraine is not going to be safe unless Crimea is at a minimum, demilitarized. And that is, part of ensuring that there is a sustainable deterrent. So I'm not going to prejudge where the Ukrainians choose to fight or how they choose to deal with Crimea over the short term, medium term, or long term. We recognize Crimea as Ukraine.
On February the 16th, during the Carnegie Foundation's online discussion about Russia's war against Ukraine, Nuland said that the United States considers the Kremlin's military bases in temporarily occupied Crimea a legitimate target for the armed forces of Ukraine.
And now let's meet my next guest. This is the creative editor of RQA magazine, Mark Soprun. Hello and welcome to Spotlight Ukraine.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, we're here to ruin the Russian fakes, and this week, Putin, the president of Russia, he spoke a lot, and predominantly he did that in his traditional militant rhetoric. So, to whom did he appeal for in this manner?
Well, I think his primary audience was probably twofold. Number one, it was to ensure some sort of domestic support, but I think many of the messages, at least what I saw, were directed towards a Western audience, primarily when he mentioned that Russia was ready to suspend the START treaty, that was really directed toward those interests in the United States or in the West, not just the United States, that are frankly very concerned about they're very sensitive to the notion of nuclear escalation. Frankly, it's a canard. It's something that the Kremlin and Putin himself have been using for a long time. I don't think that it's going to have any serious effect in policy circles, be it in Washington, D.C., Ottawa, or London. However, it did get a lot of traction in the English language press. I know, for example, Canadian press covered the issue quite extensively, as did other publications like Washington Times. Like the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. I don't think that it's going to have any serious effect on the policy or the decisions that are made around sending continued military assistance to Ukraine.
But knowing this fact, why does the Russian propaganda work much less in Ukraine comparing to the other countries of the world? Because these countries also have like democratic states. Is it still working on them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I really thought about that. And in Ukraine, I think what happened, and this is really thanks to the decision by the National Security and Defense Council to take the license away from the pro-Kremlin channels that Medvedchuk was in charge of. And I think that decision is going to be in the future regarded as a very critical decision in Ukraine's ability to unify. I think that was a very serious effort, judging by the previous 8 years of Russia's disinformation tsunamis against the Ukrainian population to divide Ukrainians. And that decision was very, very smart, both strategically and tactically. And I think following that, Ukrainians have been exposed to disinformation for so many years that I frankly believe the media literacy in Ukraine is far higher than what you would see in the West, at least vis-a-vis Russian disinformation operations. I think that it's changing now. I think some of the disinformation narratives have been so ridiculous. For example, I was told by a couple of friends in London that no one believes in the denazification, nor do they believe in the desatanization of Ukraine as strategic goals. And frankly, I suspect that the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation also doesn't believe that these are strategic goals that are somewhat even remotely attainable. But I think the simple answer to your question is that media literacy in Ukraine is really on the rise, and it's very hard to fool Ukrainians.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. But is there any logic in inventing the narratives about the United States involving into the war, about the nuclear threats, about the mobilization of Ukrainians in Great Britain? What is the logic in doing this or that?
Yeah, that's another good question. You know, there were certain targets or certain purposes to Russian disinformation. Primarily, one was to solidify their domestic audience. But on the international front, there's like really, in my opinion, there are three key components that they're trying to stop or to influence. Number one is the military component. Yep. Number two is the unity. And the third is to inject a whole bunch of doubt. We used to call that in the to show you how old I am, back in the early days of the internet, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And those are sort of the strategic goals of Russian disinformation, to put a stop, or at least to slow down military assistance and military cooperation between Ukraine and its partners, to break the unity of the Western Front. And again, that's really thanks in large part to Ukraine's diplomatic activity, the diplomatic, for lack of to stay within the military metaphor, the diplomatic front. They've done an outstanding job in keeping the Western world, especially EU. I mean, you look at Ramstein, we have 54 countries now that are members of Ramstein, together and united and focused on putting an end to Russian aggression in Ukraine. Particularly, I'd like to suggest to remind everyone that it wasn't so long ago. I know that we all have great respect for Boris Johnson, but it wasn't too long ago where he caused a bit of a row back in 2016, I think it was, just before the Brexit election. He was sort of hinting that maybe the EU had something to do with the annexation of Crimea. And for that, he was called an apologist in London. Russian oligarchs have put huge amounts of resources to buy influence in the United Kingdom. So when you consider that the United Kingdom is number one in supporting, at least one of the top three in supporting military aid to Ukraine, that's a big testament to the work of the diplomatic corps, particularly, for example, Ambassador Pristaiko. He's done an outstanding job, I think, in keeping the Ukraine-UK coalition or alliance together. It's really impressive to see. And the third is to inject doubt, really just to put doubt that Ukrainians can actually reestablish sovereignty to the 1991 borders, which I think is completely realistic today. And it's no longer in doubt, frankly. And those three targets of Russian disinformation are really the point. And frankly, I think the Kremlin is losing.
Yeah, we all hope for that. Thank you so much for being the guest to Spotlight Ukraine and trying to ruin the fakes made by the Russian propaganda machine. Mark Saprun, the creative editor of RQA, and we continue. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.